The desert had a way of wearing a person down, not suddenly, but slowly, like sandpaper dragged across the soul. Clara Dawson felt every grain of that wearing as she pushed her horse through the Arizona territory. The sun hovered low on the horizon, burning a dull red line across the sky, and every breath tasted of dust. 3 days of travel alone had stripped her to the bone. Muscles trembling, eyes aching, she rode only because stopping meant letting fear catch up. She had promised herself she wouldn't stop until she reached Fort Whitaker, until she reached her brother. But promises didn't mean much when the desert decided your limits for you. By the time she found the riverbed, long, dry, and cracked like an old man's palm, she had no strength left to fight exhaustion. She slid off her horse, legs nearly giving out. The animal nickered softly, sensing her weakness, but stayed close. Loyal as ever, Clara built a small fire, just enough for warmth, not enough to draw eyes. Thieves, outlaws, and desperate men roamed this territory like wolves. Even the army patrols were stretched thin. But her hands shook so badly she dropped her flint twice. By the time the fire sparked to life, her body was already surrendering. She curled into her blanket beneath a scrub oak, its twisted branches offering half shade, half prison. She told herself she'd sleep only for an hour, just enough to let her head stop spinning. But the desert wasn't kind, and neither were her dreams. The nightmare took her fast. One moment she was drifting, the next she was running through darkness thick as tar. Wolves howled behind her. Shadows clutched at her arms. Her horse bucked beneath her, vanishing into black smoke. She reached for something, anything, but her hands met only emptiness. The cliff edge in her dream appeared too late. She tumbled toward it with nothing to hold on to. In her real-world sleep, Clara thrashed. Her boot kicked dirt over the edge of the ledge she hadn't noticed when making camp. Her blanket snagged on a rock, pulling her body inches closer to the drop. One hard roll and gravity would have claimed her, but another set of eyes had been watching. Tall Hawk, an Apache scout cutting across the same territory, had noticed the flicker of her fire from the ridge above. A lone traveler, struggling. He approached quietly, steps soft as whispering grass. People in these lands called his people many names, some respectful, many not, but Tall Hawk knew the truth. The West wasn't divided between Apache and settlers. It was divided between those who helped and those who harmed. And Clara, wrapped tight and trembling, was in danger she couldn't see. He saw her shift too close to the edge, saw her body jerk violently, saw the dirt crumble beneath her hip. Without hesitation, he moved. Clara never felt the moment his hand steadied her. She was trapped in the nightmare's grip, fighting her invisible enemies. But when she jolted awake, heart pounding, breath ragged, she felt the warmth of a hand grounded firmly against her side. Her eyes flew open, and for a moment she didn't understand where the dream stopped and the world began. A man knelt beside her, tall, dark-haired, face painted by firelight, eyes watchful and steady. An Apache. Clara's instinct sparked fear, but his hand didn't grip. It steadied. It anchored her. And as she scrambled awake, he slowly withdrew it, showing his palms open, empty, peaceful. "You were slipping toward the ledge," he said softly, his voice low as distant thunder. "Your body wasn't safe in that nightmare." Clara's breath caught. She looked to the edge, the one she hadn't seen the night before, and felt her stomach drop. Had he not reached her, she would have fallen. 30 feet down, onto rocks sharp enough to carve bone. She swallowed, hard. "You saved me," she whispered, more to herself than him. Tall Hawk didn't nod or smile or take credit. He simply said, anyone would have done the same. But Clara knew not everyone would, and certainly not everyone who had every reason to keep their distance. In that moment, fear didn't vanish. Distrust didn't dissolve. But something shifted inside Clara Dawson, something small, fragile, and unfamiliar. Hope. Clara Dawson's body trembled not from the cold desert night, but from the presence of the man kneeling beside her. Tall Hawk, the Apache who had saved her life, remained still, his dark eyes steady, unblinking. She wanted to pull back, to scramble to her feet and distance herself, but every instinct that had kept her alive whispered caution. And yet, he hadn't harmed her. He hadn't even made a move to assert control. Instead, he had reached out only to steady her, to prevent a fatal fall. Distrust didn't dissolve overnight. Stories of fear and misunderstanding had been drilled into her since childhood. Apache warriors were outsiders, strangers, sometimes even threats. Yet, in the glow of the dying campfire, Clara saw none of the malice she had been taught to expect. Tall Hawk's hand had been steady, his expression calm and his movements careful, as if he weighed every action against the possibility of harm. Her horse had wandered during her restless sleep, spooked by the rolling of her blanket, and now nickered nervously in the darkness. Clara's hand shook as she fumbled with the reins, realizing the depth of her vulnerability. Tall Hawk stood silently, observing, and then stepped forward, with the patience of someone who understood the ways of both horse and rider. He approached her steed, speaking softly in a melodic tone she didn't understand. The animal, once frightened, relaxed under his touch, leaning into the firm guidance of the stranger. "Your horse is afraid," he said in halting English, "but it will trust me if you trust me." Clara hesitated. Trust, a concept she had clung to in theory, but never fully in practice, especially in the West, where every encounter carried the possibility of danger. Yet, seeing her horse calm, seeing his care and skill, she felt the barest thread of confidence. "You shouldn't be traveling alone," he said. More statement than question. "I have no choice," Clara replied, her voice low. "My brother. He needs me." He nodded once, without judgment. "Then I ride with you, until your trail is safe." There was no arrogance in his tone, no attempt to assert dominance, just a clear, unshakable offer of protection. And in the vast, lawless expanse of Arizona, that offer was rare, perhaps rarer than gold. Clara didn't respond immediately. She didn't need to. The trust she hadn't yet given would have to be earned step by step. But she allowed him to mount beside her, not as a conqueror, not as a stranger, simply as a companion, a guide through the dangers that lay ahead. The desert night pressed in around them, vast and indifferent. Stars shimmered cold and bright above mesas and jagged rock formations. The wind whispered through dry canyons like a warning, carrying with it the faint scent of rattlesnakes and creosote. Each mile they traveled together tested Clara's resolve. She watched Tall Hawk move with a quiet confidence, reading the land, assessing threats, navigating paths she would have deemed impassable. Every movement was calculated, careful, purposeful. He didn't just ride beside her, he guided her through the unseen dangers of the Wild West. It was during those long hours that Clara began to notice the subtle lessons hidden in his actions. How he observed the clouds to predict a storm. How he examined animal tracks to detect predators or outlaws. How he rationed water, sharing just enough for both of them without waste. Lessons in survival, patience, and awareness. Lessons the desert demanded of anyone who wished to live by dawn. Clara's fear had softened, not fully gone, but tempered by understanding. She realized that survival in the West wasn't just about courage or firepower. It was about perception, about respect for the land and those who knew it, and about recognizing allies where others might only see strangers. Tall Hawk, too, seemed aware of the silent change in her demeanor. He did not speak much, but when he did, his words were measured, thoughtful, and always rooted in practicality. There was no pretense, no unnecessary explanation. Only clarity dot as the sun rose, painting the desert in golden shadow. Clara felt the faintest glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she had thought. And maybe true survival required more than strength or stubbornness. It required trust, a fragile, tentative trust that would grow as the miles passed, as danger arose, and as the unforgiving West tested them both. The desert sun was relentless, burning down on Clara Dawson and Tall Hawk as they rode through the jagged canyons and red rock valleys of Arizona territory. Each mile seemed longer than the last, each shadow a possible threat. Clara's muscles ached from riding, her lips cracked from dust and wind, yet she kept going. She had promised herself she would reach Fort Whitaker, and she had promised her brother she would not fail. But as she glanced at the Apache warrior riding beside her, she realized that for the first time since leaving home, she was not alone. Tall Hawk moved with a calm precision that bordered on the supernatural. He scanned the terrain constantly, eyes flicking to every ridge and outcropping. He read the desert like a book, noting footprints, disturbed rocks, and the subtle shifts in the wind. Clara tried to copy him, forcing herself to notice details she would have otherwise ignored. A rattlesnake coiled under a bush, a hawk circling high above, distant hoofbeats faint on the sand. Each observation was a lesson, each lesson a survival skill that the desert demanded from anyone who wanted to live. The tension in the air thickened as the sun sank behind the mesas, casting long, distorted shadows across the canyon floor. Clara sensed movement before she saw it, faint echoes of hooves on rock, low murmurs carried by the wind. Bandits. They had been preying on travelers in this region, and she had no illusions that her journey would be safe. Tall Hawk's hand brushed against his belt, resting on the hilt of his knife. Clara felt a surge of fear, then a strange reassurance. He would not rush into violence recklessly, she realized. His calm suggested experience, strategy, and control. "Stay low," he murmured. "Move behind that boulder." Clara followed without hesitation. The shadows around them seemed to twist and come alive. 3 men on horseback emerged from the canyon, faces hidden under dusty hats, rifles leveled at anything that moved. Clara's heart raced. She felt the old instinct to bolt, to run blindly. But Tall Hawk's presence steadied her. He threw a small pouch into the dirt. Dust and pebbles erupted, forming a smoke screen between them and the bandits. Then, with the precision of a man who had walked these lands his entire life, he led Clara through a hidden path, a narrow fissure in the canyon walls that the bandits could not see. Their escape was silent and swift, a lesson in patience, observation, and timing. Clara realized the desert didn't just punish recklessness. It rewarded those who paid attention, who respected the land. By the time they emerged from the canyon, the first stars were glittering in the deepening sky. Clara's pulse finally slowed. She looked at Tall Hawk, noting the calm determination etched into his features. He was not just a protector. He was a teacher, showing her the ways of survival in the unforgiving West. The night ride continued in silence, broken only by the distant cries of coyotes and the soft clop of hooves. Clara listened, absorbing every sound, every detail, learning to anticipate danger before it arrived. Each moment with Tall Hawk was a lesson in awareness, patience, and resilience. As they paused to rest near a dry creek bed, Clara allowed herself a small measure of gratitude. Without Tall Hawk, she would have been helpless against the bandits, perhaps even lost to the desert itself. And yet, even with his guidance, she realized survival required more than just help. It required courage, adaptability, and the willingness to learn. That night, as Clara lay under the stars with her blanket pulled tight, she thought about the lessons Tall Hawk had quietly imparted: how to read tracks, how to move silently, how to anticipate threats, and most importantly, how to trust someone when the world seemed bent on proving you wrong. She understood now that fear, while natural, could be tempered by knowledge and skill. The desert had a way of teaching harsh lessons, but those willing to learn could turn fear into strength. Tall Hawk remained awake, scanning the horizon. Clara caught herself watching him, realizing that the man who had once seemed a stranger now felt like the anchor in a storm. Her trust had grown not blind or naive, but earned through action, skill, and respect. And as she drifted into a restless sleep, she knew the journey ahead would test her again, perhaps more severely, but that she would not face it alone. The West was unforgiving, but with each passing mile, Clara's fear was slowly replaced with resolve and a quiet understanding that survival and courage were lessons learned not in solitude, but alongside those willing to guide and protect. By the time Clara and Tall Hawk reached the foothills leading toward Fort Whitaker, the sky had softened into hues of lavender and rose. The desert evening brought a coolness that Clara welcomed, but it also reminded her how close she was to the place she feared and hoped for in equal measure. Her brother, her only family, was waiting there, and every mile that drew them nearer made the weight on her chest grow heavier. They set up camp beneath a cluster of juniper trees, their twisted roots digging deep into rocky soil as if defying the harshness of the land. Tall Hawk built a small fire with practiced ease, arranging stones in a deliberate circle and blowing softly until the flames rose. Clara watched him, noticing how he handled each task with intention and respect, as if every stick, every ember, every breath was part of a larger story. The West had taught him patience, something Clara knew she lacked but now admired. For a long while, they ate in silence dried meat, hard biscuits softened by warm water, and the small handful of berries Tall Hawk had found along the trail. Clara felt the quiet pressing on her, urging her to speak. She had avoided the truth long enough, both for her own sake and because she had feared Tall Hawk's reaction. But she realized something. Trust wasn't a gift freely given. It was something forged, inch by inch. Through honesty. She set down her tin cup and gathered her courage. "I haven't been honest with you," she said softly. Tall Hawk didn't look up immediately. When he did, his gaze was steady, not accusing, not demanding, simply patient. "Your eyes have carried worry since the day I found you," he said. "If you wish to speak it, I will listen." Clara took a shaky breath. "My brother, he isn't just injured. He's been accused of stealing supplies from the fort. Army supplies. If they can't prove him innocent soon, he'll be punished. Severely." Tall Hawk nodded slowly, taking in the weight of her words. "But he didn't do it," she said, voice trembling as the dam finally broke. "My brother is stubborn, but he's honest. Someone else stole those supplies. A deserter, maybe. Someone who knew the fort and blamed him. The captain doesn't believe him. Most of the soldiers don't, either." Tears welled in her eyes, catching the firelight. "I'm not just going to see him. I'm going to save him." The confession hung in the air like smoke. Tall Hawk turned his gaze toward the horizon, where the faint glow of the fort was hidden behind distant hills. "False accusations travel faster than truth," he said quietly, "and they cling to a man longer." His voice held no bitterness, but Clara sensed experience behind his words. He, too, had likely lived through misunderstandings, prejudice, and blame cast without evidence. The West was full of voices eager to speak but slow to listen. Clara wiped her eyes. "You must think I'm foolish. A woman traveling alone to challenge a military fort." Tall Hawk shook his head. "Courage is not foolishness. Blind fear is." She looked at him sharply, unsure whether his words were a rebuke or a comfort. But then he added, "Your brother is lucky. Many would turn away from him. You ride into danger for his sake." Clara felt warmth spread through her chest, gratitude, relief, and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. "Will you think less of me," she whispered, "for keeping this from you?" Tall Hawk leaned forward, adding a small log to the fire. Sparks rose like fleeting stars. "I will think of you as someone who carries heavy burdens," he replied softly. "Not someone who hides truth. Sometimes we speak when the time is right, not before." His acceptance washed over her like cool water. For the first time in days, Clara felt her shoulders loosen, the pressure around her heart easing. There was another lesson she recognized in his words. Judgment without knowledge is the quickest path to injustice. The kind of injustice now threatening her brother died as the night deepened. Clara realized something profound. Tall Hawk wasn't simply escorting her. He was helping her find clarity, strength, and a courage she hadn't known she possessed. And when he finally spoke again, his voice was steady and sure. "If your brother is innocent," he said, "truth can be found. It leaves tracks, just as animals do. I will help you follow them." Clara met his gaze, her heart catching. She had hoped for support, but she hadn't expected his unwavering commitment. Together, they would face Fort Whitaker. Together, they would uncover the truth. And Clara felt, for the first time since her journey began, that the West might offer justice after all. Fort Whitaker rose from the desert like a square, stubborn, beast-thick log walls, guard towers at each corner, and a wide wooden gate reinforced with iron bands. Soldiers patrolled the ramparts with stiff posture and suspicious eyes, rifles slung across their backs. To most travelers, the fort was a symbol of safety. To Clara Dawson, it was the place holding her brother in chains. As she and Tall Hawk approached on horseback, Clara felt her pulse pounding in her throat. Dust billowed behind them, catching the sunlight. Every step closer tightened the knot in her stomach. She had imagined this moment countless times during her journey, her brother running to her, relieved, grateful. But now that she was truly here, fear threaded its way through every hopeful thought. Two soldiers on horseback intercepted them. Before they even reached the gate, "Halt!" One barked, rifle not pointed but ready. "State your business." Clara lifted her chin, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I'm Clara Dawson. My brother, Thomas Dawson, is being held here. I've come to see him." The soldiers exchanged glances. One's eyes shifted toward Tall Hawk, lingering with an expression that hovered between caution and hostility. "And him?" the soldier asked sharply. "He is with me," Clara said firmly. Tall Hawk sat perfectly still, offering no reaction, no threat, yet Clara could feel the tension building. She had learned enough about the West to know that soldiers rarely welcomed an Apache within their walls. The soldier hesitated, then signaled for them to follow as they passed through the gate. Clara felt the weight of dozens of eyes settle on them. Soldiers paused mid-task to stare. A blacksmith leaned on his hammer. A cook peeked out from behind the mess hall door. An Apache at a frontier fort was not a common sight. Captain Reed, a stern man with silver streaks in his mustache and a spine as straight as a rifle barrel, approached, boots thudding on the packed dirt. His expression hardened when he saw Tall Hawk. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. "Bringing him inside the fort?" Clara stepped forward before the captain could say anything worse. "Captain Reed," she said, her voice carrying more strength than she felt, "Tall Hawk is my guide and protector. I wouldn't be alive without him." The captain's eyes narrowed, but he shifted his attention to her. "We weren't expecting you so soon, Miss Dawson." "I traveled fast," Clara replied. "Where is my brother? I want to see him." The captain's jaw tightened. "Your brother is under strict watch. He is allowed no visitors until the investigation is concluded." Clara's heart sank. "Investigation? He's already been accused." Tall Hawk remained silent at her side, watching, measuring the room, sensing the currents of hostility and fear. Clara could almost feel his instincts sharpening. Captain Reed crossed his arms. Supplies went missing from our storehouse. Ammunition, food rations, bandages, equipment. Your brother was the last man seen near the storeroom. No one else had access. That's the truth. It's not the truth, Clara snapped. It's suspicion. And suspicion is not proof. The tension rippled through the fort like a sudden gust of wind. Captain Reed's gaze hardened. Miss Dawson, I respect your determination, but your brother's behavior has been erratic. He's been angry, short-tempered. He even struck one of my officers when confronted. He would never. Clara protested, but even as the words left her mouth, doubt flickered. Thomas could be hot-headed. He acted before thinking. She knew this. But he was not a thief. He's being held until trial, the captain continued. If he's innocent, the evidence will show it. Clara stepped closer, lowering her voice but not her resolve. Then let me see him. Let me speak to him, please. Captain Reed looked as though he was about to refuse again until Tall Hawk spoke for the first time since entering the fort. Where the truth is hidden, there is always a track, he said calmly. But you must look for it. The captain's eyes widened more at the fact that Tall Hawk spoke fluent English than at the meaning of his words. The moment stretched long and taut. Finally, Reed exhaled sharply. Fine, Miss Dawson may see her brother, but the Apache stays outside the cells. Clara nodded. It wasn't a victory, but it was something. As she followed the captain toward the holding area, she glanced back at Tall Hawk. He met her eyes with a quiet, steady promise. I will not leave you alone in this. For the first time since entering the fort, Clara felt the faintest ember of hope, but she didn't yet know the real danger wasn't the soldier's suspicion. The real danger was the man who had framed her brother. And he was closer than anyone realized. Dawn in the desert was unlike dawn anywhere else. It didn't simply arrive, it unfolded slowly, stretching gold and rose-colored light across the hills as if painting courage onto the land itself. And as the first rays reached the Apache camp, Elena realized something astonishing. She was waking up without fear. For the first time in what felt like years, her heartbeat wasn't fighting her. Her lungs weren't tight. Her mind wasn't clawing at old shadows. Instead, she felt warm air, the soft rustling of cottonwood leaves, the faint smell of sage, and a deep, grounding calm that made her want to cry in relief. She blinked, her eyes open. Atsa sat nearby, sharpening a blade not as a weapon, but as a morning ritual, a way of preparing for the day with intention. The fire crackled low, and a pot of coffee bubbled, sending up a rich scent that always made the morning feel safer. He noticed her before she spoke. His posture softened. You rested, he said quietly. Not a single nightmare. She swallowed hard. Didn't even realize. That is how peace comes, Atsa replied. Quiet as a deer, but strong. She sat up slowly, feeling the blanket slip from her shoulders. It wasn't just a blanket. It was one of the woven Apache mantis Atsa had let her borrow. Last night he had wrapped it around her himself when she'd fallen asleep beside the fire. No panic. No jolting awake. No reliving the past. Just warmth. She exhaled shakily. I thought I would never sleep again. Not without seeing those men's faces. Atsa didn't look up from his blade. Those faces are fading. You are pushing them back. Each night farther. She watched him work slow, steady strokes of the whetstone, every movement controlled. He never rushed. Never used force. Everything he did seemed guided by purpose. You know, she said softly, I thought healing would look different. How? I thought it would be sudden, dramatic, like a moment where I felt magically better. She laughed a little at herself. Not all these tiny steps I didn't even notice. Atsa finally lifted his eyes. Most strong things grow quietly, he said. A tree, a warrior, a woman coming out of fear. Noise does not make the healing. She felt that settle into her chest. Not an idea more like truth. Later that morning, everything changed. As she stood, stretching her arms, a horse's neigh echoed across the camp. It was the cry of a horse that recognized someone familiar. She turned sharply. Her old mare, Daisy, trotted toward her. Elena's hands flew to her mouth. Tears filled her eyes instantly. Daisy had been stolen the night she'd run for her life. She thought she'd never see the gentle old mare again. Atsa stood. The men found her, he said. Tracks led far. But they brought her home to you. To her home. Elena sank to her knees as Daisy nuzzled into her chest. She wrapped her arms around the mare's neck, sobbing into her mane not from sadness, but from the overwhelming, unbelievable feeling of having a piece of her life returned. Atsa approached, stopping a respectful distance away. You see? He said softly. Not all that was lost is gone. She rose slowly, wiping tears from her cheeks, and walked toward him. Atsa. Her voice trembled, but not with fear. Not anymore? I want to stay, she said. Not because I'm afraid to go back. Not because I need protection. But because this is where I feel safe. Where I feel like myself again. Atsa's eyes softened, but he didn't move. Then stay. As your own choice. As your own woman. She stepped closer, and maybe. She hesitated, her voice gentler now. Maybe in time, if it's right, we build something together. Atsa placed a hand on his chest, Apache sign for a sacred promise. When your heart is ready, he said. Not one day before. And that became the beginning, not of a dramatic rescue, not of a forced bond, not of a woman depending on a man, but the beginning of her stepping out of the nightmare, shaped by her own strength, supported by a man who understood the courage it took to heal. The desert sun climbed higher. Atsa handed her a tin cup of coffee. Elena smiled, not a fragile smile, but a real one. She had survived the darkest night. Now she was walking into a brighter day.